All right, today we are going to build a blueprint, or maybe think of it like a decoder ring for understanding what a research study is actually trying to tell you. Let's jump right in. You've seen it, right? Some shocking headline pops up, claiming a new study proves something absolutely incredible. But you get that little nagging feeling in the back of your head. Like, what's the catch here? What's the fine print they're not showing me? Well, the secret to becoming a much smarter, more critical reader, it really just boils down to understanding three key terms, three words that researchers use to frame the entire scope and reality of their work. So let's break them down. Okay, let's tackle the biggest point of confusion right up front, delimitations versus limitations. They sound similar, but they're polar opposites. Just think of it like this. Delimitations are the intentional choices a researcher makes. Limitations are the constraints they have to deal with. One is about control, the other is about everything you can't control.
So let's start with those choices. We're going to call this Part 1, Drawing Your Research Map. And this is all about getting a handle on delimitations. So what are delimitations? Simply put, they're the boundaries the researcher draws around their own study. They're deliberately, consciously making choices to narrow the focus. The whole point is to make the project manageable and super specific. The key here is that this is all by design.
And what does that actually look like? Well, it could be choosing to study only teachers from urban schools, not rural ones. Or maybe limiting the whole project to a single geographic area. It could even be deciding to use one specific scientific theory to frame the work, or collecting data only through interviews. These aren't weaknesses, they're the rules of the game the researchers set for themselves.
I love this analogy because it just clicks. Think of delimitations as the researcher literally drawing the borders on a map. They're telling you, my entire study exists within these lines, and here's exactly why I drew the map this way.
All right, so our map is drawn. Now we need to actually build something on it. That brings us to Part 2, Laying the Foundation, which is all about understanding assumptions. So what in the world are assumptions? Well, they're the things a researcher basically has to accept as true just to get the project started. They are absolutely necessary starting points, but, and this is a big but, they are unproven within the study itself. For example, a researcher has to assume that people are answering their survey questions honestly. They have to work on the assumption that the scientific tools they're using are actually accurate, and that when they interview people, those people really understood what was being asked. You can see why you kind of have to believe these things to move forward, right?
And this metaphor is just perfect. Assumptions are the foundation stones of the entire research house. You couldn't build anything without them, but you also have to be honest that that foundation, to some degree, is built on things you're taking on faith.
And that brings us to our third and final piece of the puzzle. And this one is often the most revealing. Welcome to Part 3, What You Can't Control. In other words, let's talk about limitations. So, remember how delimitations were all about the researcher's choices? Well, limitations are the complete opposite. These are the weaknesses, the problems, the constraints that were totally out of the researcher's control. And they're important because they might have a real impact on the study's results. So, what's a limitation? Oh, it could be anything. Running out of time or money is a classic one. Or maybe you couldn't get enough people to participate, so you're working with a small sample size. People dropping out of the study halfway through, that happens all the time. A good researcher will even acknowledge their own potential biases as a limitation. These aren't excuses, they're just honest admissions of reality.
And this just nails it. Limitations are where science gets real. The researcher is basically raising their hand and saying, look, this wasn't done in a perfect, sterile lab. The real world is messy, and here's all the messy stuff that happened that I couldn't do anything about.
Okay, so we've got our three key terms down: delimitations, assumptions, and limitations. Now for the really important part, let's put it all together and see the complete picture. So here's how it all flows together. First, the researcher uses delimitations to draw the lines on the map. Those are their choices. Then they build their study inside those lines, and they do it on a foundation of assumptions. But all the while, real life is happening outside the lines, and that's where the limitations, all those unavoidable constraints, come into play.
And there you have it. That's the blueprint. By understanding these three simple ideas, you can now look past the flashy headline and see the actual structure of the research, the choices they made, the things they took for granted, and the real-world problems they faced.
So, I'll just leave you with this question. The next time you see a study making some huge claim, will you be the person who stops for a second and asks, what choices did they make? What did they have to assume was true? And maybe most important of all, what was happening just outside the lines?